Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn more at uber.com/flexibilityworks.
Check podcasts.
Welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. I'm your host, Rob Shaw, coming to you from the Check News World Headquarters here in Victoria. The spring session, the BC legislature is over, and it ended not with a whimper, but with a bang, with some major votes, and confidence votes, legislation, and also something we have come to call Blurgate, because, well, gate is basically, that's what we use for scandals these days. To break the gates down, we shall bring in our panel. You know them each and every week. Jeff Ferrier, Allie and Jillian Oliver here. Thank you. Let us begin. We'll get to Blurgate. I know that's what everyone's tuning in for, is Blurgate. But we're going to begin with the passage of the thing we've been talking about for weeks now, Bill 15, fast-tracks projects, gives them special cabinet designations to rewrite environmental and permitting rules to get things built faster. Huge opposition we've covered before. Major Indigenous leadership organizations, municipalities, environmental groups, even some business groups like the Chamber of Commerce. Tie vote, 46-46. Greens, Conservatives, Independents on this side, NDP on that side. And then we have the Speaker, Papa Raj, as I call him, Raj Chauhan, beloved until this vote by all people in the House, cast the deciding vote in favor of his party on a matter of confidence to bail the NDP out on some confidence votes. Let's start there. Allie, is this a win for the NDP, getting Bill 15 through in a tie and a speaker?
It's a technical win, of course, because now it's happened. It's going through. The pressure's on to make sure that there are no slip-ups past this point. Because of all of the criticism that happened during this spring session about this bill. So, I mean, it's a win until it's not, until another group comes out and says that they're oppositional to it. And the more time that goes by, there could be some more things that could feed into that. And you mentioned what the BC Chamber of Commerce, the Union of BC Municipalities that oppose it. One quote that I read from an Indigenous leader was that there was a step back on reconciliation. Like, those are powerful words, right? And so, yeah, it's a technical win. I mean, no one will actually talk about this only passed with one vote. It got through, and here we are now. I liked what the Conservative Party said on this one, in putting into perspective for us of just trust us. Like, absolutely not will I trust this government. So, yeah.
But technical win, a win is a win, Jeff. Mike Farnworth, the House Leader, said, you know what, we got it done. And he thinks that in the coming months, this will all calm down. Government will start using this powerful tool, and everyone's fears will be unfounded. That was the government response to this.
Well, I think that the government's going to face some significant opposition from some First Nations and stakeholders for sure. But this, in my view, it's a political win for the BC government despite that. So in the short term, Premier is going to have to face those legal challenges that First Nations have promised. And politically, there's no question that they're going to have to manage strained relationships with First Nations and environmental groups, folks who are upset with how Bill 15 is passed. But for most British Columbians, the government's focus on speeding up reviews of major projects in mining, in energy, as well as public sector investments in schools, hospitals, and roads, projects that secure major investments, secure jobs, stable revenues for a government that's in deficit. This is going to be popular with folks. Voters see what's happening with Trump and tariffs. They understand that the old model of economic integration with the United States and rules-based trade with the U.S. has changed. They want a government that's going to stand strong, respond with purpose, and take the necessary steps to secure BC's political and economic sovereignty. And that's what they've see Premier Eby do here.
All that with one bill that the government called enabling legislation at the beginning until it blew
Three
up
bills.
into the
Three bills.
world's
Three
greatest
bills.
legislation to respond to
Bill 7, Bill 14, Bill 15.
Right.
Three bills.
Okay. Well, we've Jillian, I kind of hypothesized a little bit online that this is a Pyrrhic victory in the sense that it is a victory, but the cost is so high to the government that perhaps it's a loss. I think if you were to start this process by saying, okay, NDP, you're going to pass a bill and it is going to torch to the ground 8 years of reconciliation efforts with Indigenous groups, and they're going to say you've set reconciliation back, and Melanie Mark, former cabinet minister, is going to come out and call on the Premier to step, like, you'd probably say that's maybe not worth it? I don't know. What do you think of that argument?
Well, I think that the government obviously was aware of that, and they decided that it was worth it because I think, the alternative, according to them, is that they have nothing to show for themselves in 3.5 years when they go to voters and ask them for another term. I think, so it all kind of hinges, I think, on what they actually get done with it. Are the projects that they choose to push forward going to be contentious with First Nations, environmental groups, and municipalities? And then second, I think, are they actually going to get tangible things done? Because I think for so long in BC, the political dynamic has been, it just feels like we're not going anywhere. Like things just aren't happening. Things don't get better. Successive governments promise to make things better, nothing happens. And with this bill, the government has been saying we can't do it because of all these regulations and it takes too long and all of this. Now they've pushed through what they want, given themselves more power. They actually have to deliver things that people like. And I think that's going to be easier said than done because, it's different for every type of project. But when it comes to the things that they say are going to be priorities, which are like municipal work projects like schools, a lot of the holdups on those projects are infrastructure that municipalities need to support their expansion. And that requires resources, requires more provincial government spending. So it's going to be difficult in practice. And we'll see, they've made the case that they really need this in order to deliver. So now they actually have to deliver.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with that. And Allie, like, we're broke as a province. That's the other component. If you're sitting there, one of the rationales that Beau and Ma used in the final days of this is so urgent because if you're a parent and you see your kid in school and they're in a musty portable, this bill is going to help them get out of that with schools. But you look at the budget and the capital plan, the things we've been talking about for months, there's no money for government. Their credit rating's downgraded. Their borrowing is maxed out. And as Jillian points out, now they've sold this bill to everyone as we're going to build schools. We've eliminated the final red tape and ditches and problems and permitting. The schools, they're going to be built. But what if there's no money or labor or to build them or land? What position does that put the government in?
This is what I mean by the pressure is on, and they now have to execute on this in such a flawless way, given that there's so many external organizations that don't want to see this succeed because of all of the opposition. I think the Conservatives have essentially labeled this and the other bills that Jeff mentioned of this is just a power-hungry government. And so when we talk about, we're broke, no one's going to be able to actually do this. So a year from now, is Minister Ma going to say we built 200 schools and hospitals? Probably not, but I can promise you that people are keeping track of this, and they will for the next 365 days. And so that is a massive amount of pressure for something that they could have easily just waited until they dedicated that time for consultation over the summer months and talked about this again in the fall.
Jeff, let's bring you in on that. Like if I'm the mayor of Surrey, for example, where we perpetually don't have enough schools and I don't see progress here in the next little while from a government that has said this bill will allow us to build schools, partly because the government doesn't have enough money to build the schools. Does that not raise it? There'll be no boogeymen left to point at for the provincial government now that they've given themselves the power to do this. And then on some of the major projects you mentioned, it takes years often for them to materialize. So is there a potential here that the proof being in the pudding, there's no pudding coming to help the government kind of explain this in the short term?
Well, the government needs to show results and stop telling now. We're done through the political narrative stage, and it's time for the deliver stage. It's interesting to hear the Conservatives in particular talk about how the province has no money, they can't build. Prioritizing projects for reviews and approval is an affront to public accountability and due process. This is the party that promised to rip up UNDRIP and said it would take environmental reviews off of major projects. And so they're in this position where they're defending everything that they said that they hated during the campaign and really throughout their existence. And now
it's
you have the NDP.
Because the NDP are ripping up the things that they said they were going to defend. So you have the two parties doing the opposite things.
Well, the NDP said that they were going to build a resilient and sustainable economy. And they've put their, they've stated what they're going to do. They're going to advance economic development. They're going to advance job creation. It's why the Mining Association of British Columbia, the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade have come out in favor of Bill 15. It's why the Business Council of British Columbia has said positive things about the bill as a step in the right direction, but more to do. It's because they sense that in the face of Trump making things more difficult for British Columbia and our economy, given where we're at with our budget, and that you need efforts like this to create the economic activity and revenues that we need. Like, we can't be a province where our number one industry now is fundraising for stakeholder groups to oppose everything. We need real.
I thought our number one industry was getting hired by the government to work for the government.
That's a small number of people who do pretty well. But there needs to be an economic vision and a plan. And I've yet to hear from the Conservatives or any of the parties or the opponents of the bill where they expect to raise the money for everything that they say the government needs to invest in.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Well, we'll leave the budgetary talk aside because I sat through hours of budget estimates with the finance minister this week, and I didn't hear anything from her on how we're managing the budget either, including some phantom savings that may or may not exist. But we'll put that aside. We'll come back to it in the summer. I want to talk about a sub-controversy here, the Blurgate, the kerfuffle over Port Moody NDP MLA Rick Glumac voting virtually on another confidence bill, Bill 14. There are written rules. I didn't even know this, but there are written rules from the speaker that the parties agreed to that when you vote virtually, you have to be in a work location, clear audio, clear camera, identifiable, secure, nobody around you, and no virtual backgrounds. You cannot be sitting on a beach drinking a Mai Tai and use that little virtual screen to put an office behind you. That's not allowed. Rick Glumac's background was blurred, which is an option if you go under the virtual settings of your Zoom. You couldn't really tell where he was, but it did look like a room. The Conservatives said that's not allowed. Vote shouldn't count. Speaker said it's fine. Conservatives walked out in protest. Blurgate. Jillian, your thoughts on Blurgate?
I think it's a bit silly. I mean, it really smacks of the last day of session. I think it was the last day, right? Yeah.
It was 8 o'clock on the night before the last day of session, but yeah.
Everybody is just done. And I think, it's a tense makeup of the legislature, just the narrowest of majorities. The Conservatives are under pressure because they've got their own divisions. They've been sitting late, like you said. And I think that you kind of, the Conservative reaction seemed over the top. And I have to imagine that it's sort of like, at the end of a long day when you've been traveling with your kids and they just have a meltdown over like a cracker falling on the floor or something. Because it's so silly. And I think that if you're thinking like objectively, like nobody is going to think that it's reasonable for government to fall over a blurred background because it was a confidence vote and they were trying to get Glumac's vote thrown out because of this. And it's also, this is a new initiative to allow remote voting. There's lots of good reasons for that. Support people with families, support people with illnesses, make the legislature more accessible. There's a big recruitment problem for MLAs right now because it's such a tough job. So I think it was quite silly.
Yeah, I can't imagine, like Allie, the next day John Rest had a press conference. He's like, we should be in day one of an election right now. And I thought, an election on Blurgate? Is that really what anybody wants? You know, like the numbers are there. Say what you want. The numbers are there for the NDP. The speaker's got to break the tie, blah, blah, blah. But like a technicality on a blurred background, I can't imagine that would be a good starting point to an election campaign.
It's so embarrassing. Like,
okay. All right.
I don't get this, because it doesn't change the result of, if he had unblurred it with the click of a button, then we wouldn't be having this conversation. And so, like, we have serious things to get to. Why are we talking about this? This is completely, it's not embarrassing to one political party. It's an embarrassing to all of them for even entertaining this.
Yeah. And a little bit embarrassing, Jeff, to Rick Glumac, considering that Darlene Rochford, the MLA for Esquimalt-Colwood, voted virtually from her hospital bed just a couple of hours after having a baby, holding the newborn in her arms. And she managed to pull this off, like clear camera, clear sight, got her vote. There's Glumac sitting in what looks like a room, can't pull this off. Everyone seems to be foolish in this. Anyway, that's my question to you.
Well,
yes or no?
Well, I think the answer is yes. Okay. You are correct. I assume the government whip, Janet Rutledge, is going to have some words with Mr. Glumac about unblurring the background. And I don't know if you saw the second vote on Bill 15. It came to his time to vote remotely, and then they asked the person online, what do you vote? And it was like 20 seconds. He just didn't do anything. And so you're like, is the government going to fall because Rick Glumac's not paying attention? Fortunately, at the last second, he voted. This would be a silly reason to go to the voters in an election. I can imagine knocking on doors and telling people that we're in an unwanted election because some guy didn't unblur his background. And I will point out that if blurry vision in the Legislative Assembly is a reason for invalidating votes, that pretty much every piece of legislation and vote from the 1960s and 70s would be invalid. Have you seen stories of people in the legislative bars and parliamentary bars across this country? We'd have we'd be an anarchy. We'd be chaos. There'd be nothing done.
Okay, well, that's fair enough. But it's the end of Blurgate. It's amazing to me to think that there'd be an argument about that, but there we are. As Jillian said, let's go around and talk about the session, because this felt like, the end of a very heated session. We sketch out all the parties, the NDP, the Conservatives. Reminder that the Conservatives lost 3 MLAs at the start of this session. The Greens starting the session with a confidence agreement with the NDP and then voting against 2 confidence measures to end the session. There's like this incredible sort of weird arc for everybody over the last 3 or 4 months, Jillian, that is sort of fascinating to kind of watch.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, like I said, that goes to the numbers in the legislature, which are very tight. That makes things politically heated. It also just makes things quite taxing on the MLAs because they've got to be there for every vote. It's very intense when the numbers are not as tight. There's much more wiggle room. You don't need everyone there to vote because you kind of know the way that it's going to go. You just need quorum. So very intense. And I think, also the legislative agenda was largely driven by these enabling bills that essentially give the government more power. So the main debate was about a government with a very slim majority giving itself more power and subverting some legislative norms to do that by having the speaker break the tie. So, I mean, yeah, very heated. Also the first session after an election. So I think lots of reasons for that.
Yeah, you did pick up a lot of frustration from the NDP on, Jeff, I'll bring you in on this, on having to constantly be there, attending, arcane division votes on amendments to sub-amendments to whatever, and the bells ring, and there's the premier who's probably doing something important, meeting somebody, dragged into the chamber with all the ministers, and everybody's got to sit there. I mean, that is democracy, and the voters sent those numbers here, but I can't imagine that it would have been a frustrating session for David Eby and New Democrats who've enjoyed a freer reign under previous Horgan and other elections.
Yeah, governing's hard when you have a very slim majority. And opposition parties will always use every tool at their disposal to advance their agenda, to get noticed. I was part of a third party in Ontario at the Legislative Assembly there, and we were as obstructionist as anyone possibly could.
This was when you dressed as Hydrozilla, right? That was
it was around then. I also dressed as a wizard one time to perform an exorcism of the Premier's office when the Liberals became government. We wanted to get the bad vibes of the Conservatives.
Hot tips for the opposition.
But yeah, it's tough, and no one said governing is going to be easy. But the government got 3 bills to advance its economic agenda through. They've launched a power call that's going to bring all sorts of new clean energy and provincial investment into the province. We all got our $110 ICBC rebates, the consumer carbon tax. Remember that has gone by the wayside. They didn't get everything they wanted to do, but they made meaningful progress, especially on the economy, fighting back against Trump's side.
Yeah. Allie, what jumped out at you on the session from all these different arcs of parties?
Yeah, there are 2 things. The fact that we had a Trump situation, and all of this was happening during a federal election. And so we'll start with the Trump side of things. You know, it's a dance across the political spectrum. And I promise I have a point with this, because if we take us back a few months, the throne speech was not necessarily like the bread and butter NDP throne speech that we've seen in the past. It was a response to the US-Canada debacle. And then on top of that, you had kind of to crystal ball predict what was going to happen in the federal election. And there was a time, and these were good times for me, where Pierre Poilievre was 20 points up, and we thought that we were going in for a Conservative prime minister. And so on a provincial side, we were preparing for probably a cold reception in Ottawa. And now things have massively changed on that front. And so all of this to say that I think that the NDP have adjusted where they land on the political spectrum of things because of these 2 major things that have happened in Canada and North America.
Okay, great discussion. Thank you to the panel for being here. Thank you for watching. Make sure you subscribe on the YouTube channel if you're watching us on Check and the various apps, and to our audio podcast where we have more discussion this week. Thank you so much for being here. We'll be back next week with all the latest in BC politics here on Political Capital. Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn more at uber.com/flexibilityworks.